Here we are. Well, actually, I guess I could just start talking, couldn't I?
You are our everything.
And we're live.
Yeah.
Welcome, everyone, to the Grief, Healing, and Hope panel for QuaranCon2022. Before we get started, a few brief housekeeping notes. First of all, thanks so much for being here, everyone, panelists and audience members alike. Second of all, our code of conduct is listed on our website, which is QuaranCon2022.com, and the code of conduct can be found at /code of conduct. Please check that out and please adhere to it while interacting with any and all QuaranCon events. Thank you. Book sale. We've got one and it's massive. There are over 60 titles involved and we would absolutely love for you to check that out. It is a bunch of free and 99-cent books, many of which are only on sale for the duration of the con. So please check that out. So many amazing books. Yeah, like I'm gonna easily spend more than $0, which means, and there are a bunch of free titles. Yeah, like probably, actually I can't estimate. I'm gonna say like 15. I bet I'm gonna spend about $15 on that. Mainly because I also own a lot of them already. So like, you know, but there's amazing titles there. Please check out our website for merch. And also our schedule, which displays in your local time. The trick that I'm still very proud of 3 years in.
Super cool.
Magic.
So unless you're using a VPN, in which case it'll display in whatever time zone you've set yourself to. But if you switch it to your actual local location, then you'll be fine. Okay, so that's enough of that. We have, as you can see, folks, 11 amazing people participating. No, wait, 10 amazing people. I can't count. 9 plus 1, but somehow my brain turned that into. We have 10 amazing people participating in this panel. Well, okay, 9 amazing people, and then me, and I'm
who is the overlord?
Extra amazing.
12 raccoons in a trench coat. That is all I am. I might be an amazing embodiment of 12 raccoons in a trench coat, but I'm still not actually.
It's true.
We've already decided you're our everything. That's your official title. So
Our amazing raccoon overlord.
Dream overlord.
So you may be wondering, Virginia, why are there so many people in this panel? I thought QuaranCon tried to keep things, you know, limited so that the chaos wasn't too much. And that's an excellent question. And the answer is
We're pro chaos.
We're pro, well, one thing is we're pro chaos.
we're neutral chaos.
No. Levi, stop that.
We were benevolent before.
We are benevolent.
No,
okay,
she's
rein it in.
benevolent.
I haven't even gotten to the introductions, people. I'm gonna mute you.
We got to grieve here.
So there are a lot of us. As you can see, it is going to be a bit chaotic, but that's okay. That's how we roll. The reason for there are so many of us here is because this is not even the full representation of the people involved in the Alchemy of Sorrow, but it is a decent sampling of the authors involved in the Alchemy of Sorrow, which is an anthology that will be releasing publicly in the fall, and which just closed out a very successful Kickstarter. Whoop whoop. So we are very, very excited about it. But we're here to talk about grief in general in SFF, because that is what inspired the whole anthology. And then we're also going to talk about the anthology itself in particular and our roles in it. So let's get down to it. We're going to do self-introductions, and we're going to go in alphabetical order if I can keep my brain on track for alphabetical order. Always a gamble. But if everyone could, as a reminder, we're going to do our little game from the Discord. So, hi, my name is, I write, and I deal with pain by blank. So we're going to start with Angela.
Okay. All right. Let's see if I can remember everything now. Hi, my name is Angela Boord. I write kind of twisty, epic romantic fantasy, and I deal with pain by stress baking and eating chocolate chips out of the bag and reading romance novels.
Nice. Excellent. Chocolate chips out of the bag. Ooh, I like that. Okay, I think Clayton's next, unless I'm horribly. Oh, wait, no, sorry. Carol's next, because I'm not actually good at alphabetical order. I did Carol's next.
It's 2 C's.
Hi, I'm Carol A. Park. I write dark, epic, romantic fantasy, also hopeful, but some combination thereof. And I deal with pain by listening to loud, angry, and or depressing music, and sometimes writing.
Excellent. Sometimes writing. That sounds like, those all sound like good ways. All right. So now Clayton, because yes,
Clayton.
alphabet.
I am Clayton Snyder. I write dark fantasy, and I deal with pain by either eating or making equally dark jokes.
I hear that. I feel that. Excellent. Okay. So that's I'm now looking at everyone's names. So who actually goes next? Is it Intisar? Can I do that? Yes. Before.
I think it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's how the alphabet works, right?
I was trying.
So
We're writers.
I've just seen the ABCs.
We don't need to know the
Words, not
order of the
alphabet.
Yeah.
Exactly.
My name is Intisar. I write Mighty Girls of Diverse Worlds, primarily young adult fantasy. And I deal with pain by writing, by getting writer's block, and by secretly swearing in the shower, which I guess is not such a secret now. So
Intisar.
I didn't know that I could love you more, Intisar, but I do now. So thank you for that.
It seemed possible, and yet
Here we are.
somehow
The love is deepened. I didn't think, but
we all have to let it out somewhere, guys.
absolutely. That's why the love increased. I mean, I'm impressed that you keep it to the shower, but that's because I swear constantly as I breathe. But anyway, okay. So after I comes, wait.
Hey,
No
I
idea.
think.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. IJK. Yes. So Kerstin.
And then it's-
Oh, hey. So my name is Kerstin Espinosa Rosero. I write and draw epic fantasy, and I deal with pain by kickboxing, drawing dragons, and drawing dragons doing things I wish I could do.
I
Guarding
love.
piles of money. What?
No, I love everything about that. Keep going.
That's how I deal with pain.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I love both of those things. Except I don't kickbox, but martial art to deal with pain, yes. And drawing dragons, I can't, but I
accept pain also.
Except, yeah, sure. I mean, that's just evening things out. Karmic balance. Okay, I think after K comes L, but I'm really not sure.
We got another K.
Other K.
Crystals again.
You got tricked by the alphabet.
There are two Ks in the alphabet.
Two C's and
just
two
like-
Ks.
Ks. 2 Ks. I cannot. Okay, Krystle, you're up.
Hi, I'm Krystle Matar. I write, I'm calling it romantic grimdark, so it's pretty painful, but also there's lots of smooches in it. Don't laugh at me.
It was so
Please
accurate.
do laugh
though.
at me. Yeah. Please do laugh at me. I encourage everyone to laugh at me.
I just haven't heard the subgenre romantic grimdark before, and it's so
Pretty
on
good.
point
That is on point. It's
Yeah.
very on point. So that was the last thing you said was romantic grimdark.
Yeah. So yeah, it's there's a lot of pain and it's very bleak, but also they smooch and they have a good time when they do it. So I deal with pain by making strong male protagonists cry, and by tattooing myself, and by collecting whiskey.
Yay. Although I get it, but also it seems like tattooing yourself would also induce a little bit more pain,
Well,
but not much. Yeah, it's not actually.
the answer is going to be really heavy, so I'm going to sidestep it. And
Okay, that's fair.
just
No. That is, we don't
Yeah.
go there now.
I was going to say that the collecting whiskey would be mostly in your bloodstream with grief, but
well,
She
it's
also
cool that you have some left over.
it's a pretty collection.
I've got some in the bottles, but I mean, depends on how the day goes. My
Yeah.
blood alcohol level would spike, but
There's so many ways to collect whiskey, Levi. It doesn't have to just be.
It's true. It doesn't just have to be in the bloodstream
some,
or the liver.
sometimes
Okay, all right. Who's next?
Levi.
That's Kate.
Me.
Levi. Well, you can
Hey,
finally.
excuse for talking. My name is Levi. I write epic fantasy and YA, but epic fantasy. The epic stuff right now is under LW Jacobs, but it's a dirty trick because my middle name is Wallace. And I deal with pain by sugar, followed by salt, followed by sugar in a vicious cycle. And
I thought you said assault, and I was
and
gonna say, and
sugar and
everybody
assault,
looked at me
yes.
with my
I
tattoos.
sprinkle on my victims, and then anyways, I also do cry sometimes, and I am an American man. Just saying that. Next.
Love it. Love it. More crying, please. Okay, wait. Well, who's Pooch? Krystle. We love dogs. Okay. So after L comes what? We have an R and a Q. Q comes with R though, right? Yay, Q. Quinn, go ahead.
Okay, I am Quenby Olson. I write crap. I write.
No, you don't.
No.
Very good.
Very good
Don't
books.
put yourself down.
Not the
I
best
write-
seller.
Quenby. Please don't let it cut off there. I write fantasy, romance, some horror, comedy, basically everything, whatever I feel like. And I deal with pain and grief by baking, obsessively cleaning, and getting into my minivan and listening to 90s rock music extraordinarily loudly.
Awesome.
And then I feel more pain because I realize that it's on the classic rock station and I am very old. So
That's relatable.
Yeah.
Relatable, and also just making all of us feel old, I think. So.
Mhm.
I know good music. Oh my God, it's 30 years old. You know?
Oh,
I think the first time I felt really old because that was when I was walking through a grocery store and it was playing in the grocery store aisles, like music I
know.
liked and
On
knew
the
all the
grocery
words to, and I was
store.
like, oh God.
Oh no, you've hit grocery store level.
Right? Yeah.
When they put on the
Not
soft
Muzak
rock
Nirvana.
station. Right.
Okay. However, we are not going to forget Rachel, so you're up.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I write very character-driven, emotionally dark fantasy, and I deal with pain by probably writing some very dark stories and then putting on really angsty music as I'm writing, and then just singing my soul out to this music, and normally end up like, you know, that scary dancing that no one should ever see. I'll just like disintegrate into that, just like yelling as I'm wildly like, oh, I'm going to start doing it. No, I'm going to sit poisely here, and that's how I deal with pain in my writing.
Love it. I guess V is the thing that comes after that, right? Is that right? We got everybody else? QRTV? Huh? Yeah. Okay. Sweet. So I'm up, and I don't know. Most people watching QuaranCon stuff have probably seen me once by now, but if not, I am Virginia McClain. I write epic and urban fantasy, and I deal with pain by embracing all of my favorite tropes and taking some of my less favorite tropes and twisting them. And yeah, writing is honestly one of the main things I do to deal with pain. So to keep my answer short, we're going with that. Okay. And I do need to keep it short because we are 14 minutes in and
Good God.
finished the introduction. So for the record, as we go, I think we're going to have 1 to 2 people comment on each topic and then kind of move on. If you desperately want to say something about a point that was made, please jump in, but I'm not going to be like, okay, everyone's going to get a chance to talk about this. That's not going to happen, with the exception of at the end, as we talk about some of our stories. I do want us all to talk about our individual stories. So, try to be as succinct as you can, keeping in mind just how many people we have and how little time we have left. I will warn the audience, we might go a little bit over. There's not another event until 30 minutes after this one ends. And I am both the tech person and the person in charge of the con. So I get to say that we get to go over. Yay. So we'll probably do that a little bit, but we'll try not to do too much. We definitely don't want to encroach on the next event. So, all right. Let's start things off. We're going to talk about grief in general first, and then we'll move into the anthology. But first, we're going to just talk about grief in society, because that's, it varies from place to place, how it's dealt with and what is dealt with. But in North American society, and I believe a large portion of European society as well, I think it's safe to say that we don't talk about grief a ton. And I think we would all benefit from talking about it more. Anyone have some insights on why you think we don't talk about grief as much? And and we'll go from there.
about death though, do we? I used to work for a charity which had a legacy section. So it was gifts and wills. And it was the number one thing. People would not talk about death. They were just, it's in our society just to not speak about it. And it is a very Western thing.
Yeah. And it's a weird one too, because like, talk about a universal experience. Like,
Right.
Is there anything more universal than death?
But I think we see that a lot in fantasy because there's all these immortality projects that you see in fantasy, right? Where you cheat death, or for a while there in YA, it was the girl or the guy is going to die, and then suddenly they manage to make themselves into a demigod or something. And it's like, no, that's not actually what happens, right? Like, death is the one thing you really can't count on. And I do think that we do ourselves a disservice when we don't talk about it in our stories and we don't present it realistically in our stories, because you're right, it really isn't mentioned much in society. And then when it happens, as it inevitably will for all of us, we'll all lose people before we lose our own lives. And if you haven't seen it and dealt with it imaginatively as well as in community, you don't have any tools to figure out how to navigate it when it happens.
Totally. And it's so much more even than just the experience. Like, there's the experience of grief itself, and then there's like the practicalities of it. I mean, going back to what Rachel was saying too, right? Like, there's a whole organization about dealing with what happens after someone dies, right? But why aren't there like lessons about it long before that point? Like, oh, here's how you deal with wills, and here's how you deal with leaving your legacy to someone else, or here's how you deal with what happens when your parents die and you're suddenly left holding the bag. Like that, all of that is stuff that comes up for a lot of people, and we just don't address it that much, which is kind of seems odd to me. So I had originally put a different, so then we also, the thing that also is strange to me is like the time limits we put on grief as a society too. Just like, I mean, you even see it written out sometimes in like self-help books of like, it's going to, like give yourself this much time to whatever. And, guidelines can be helpful, I guess. But the idea that there's any time limit on grief to me just seems kind of absurd. Anybody else want to comment on that?
I do wonder sometimes if it's because of how we've coded strength as a collective culture, where strength is resilience and vulnerability and weakness, or vulnerability is a weakness. And so, it's like we've accepted that, okay, some things are so heavy that we need to be vulnerable, but not too long, because then you're weak. And then you've got to put yourself together and go back and be strong again. And so we've coded certain emotions as feminine or weak or both. And so for those of us who want to be tough and strong and all that, we have to put ourselves into a box and be rigid and bowl through life and not let anything knock us down. But it's unrealistic because life's hard.
Yeah. I feel like
also, oh, sorry.
No, you do.
And also, I think we're a society of time limits too, like just in general, because you have to have, you need a doctor's note to be excused from school, or a doctor's note to be excused from work. And you only get like 6 weeks for maternity leave, it's like you have to fit your life into these boundaries. You can only have 5 absences. Your kid can only have 5 absences or whatever it is. I homeschool, so my kids never give me absences, but you know what I mean? It's like there's no extra time. It's like it's all regimented. We're going to give you this much for this, and then you must be fine because you have to be
ready to go back to work.
Fine, right. And then, so it's all in boxes.
And capitalism, I think, has to plays into that too, right? The idea that oh, sure, this is hard, so you're allotted, X window to be upset about it. But then if you aren't back to being a productive member
of society,
which is such an ableist perspective, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
And also just weird that we've prioritized money making over the human experience.
Yeah.
No, this will go so quickly into anti-capitalism.
Sorry.
Go on, Chris.
Oh,
Yeah.
Quinn
I was gonna
froze. So
say,
Rachel,
even
oh, no,
when
never
you
mind.
think back into like Victoria. Sorry, did she freeze up?
You froze up for a moment. You're back?
I think
Or-
you're back.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Quinn.
Even in like Victorian and Regency times, they would have when you go into mourning and you wear the mourning colors for
Morning
like
leaves.
this exact amount of
Yeah.
time. You know, like, yes, you know, okay, so if you're, and it would even for stages for the family, if you were the immediate family, wear it, let's say, for a year, and would wear full black head to toe. If you were just kind of maybe a cousin or something, you might just wear like the armband, or you might wear something. And then you go into half mourning, which would be then your lavenders and grays. And then you could come out of it after so many months. So even then, hundreds of years ago, there were the layers of like, okay, now you can step into this level of grief, and now you can step into this level of grief. Oh, now you're allowed to wear pink again. Everything's fine. You're happy again. So it was odd that, yeah, even then it was like it was this timetable of now you're super sad and you can't go out. Now you're sort of sad and now you're good.
The idea that you can't go out because you're sad, and it's like sometimes that's what you need to do, right? Like it's dependent on each person, but sometimes isolating is like the worst possible thing you can do. So yeah.
But it's interesting
then
the
you
mourning
just-
clothes.
Morning
It
leaves,
was like
yeah.
a, you know, like a flag for everybody else to say like, okay, something terrible happened, you know, I'm in mourning. You know, everybody should realize that. Whereas I think now we're like more of a secret society, which goes back to, you know, you're supposed to smile, everything's fine. And yet everything's not fine, you know? So it's just kind of interesting how that has changed.
I think that goes back to, you know, the reason we don't talk about it very often is it reminds other people of their vulnerability. And like Krystle mentioned, vulnerability is weakness, and people don't like to feel that way. So it doesn't get talked about like it needs to be. It doesn't get dealt with like it needs to be. And it kind of leaves us in this vicious cycle of, you know, who do I turn to and what do I do? You know.
But then conversely, if we did talk about it, we would know we were a part of a community, and we would know that we are not experiencing any unusual weakness. It's just
right.
The human condition. So like if we did talk about it, it would be just another way to connect to people.
We probably wouldn't feel so weak if we actually talked about it. And we're not
Wrote
talking
stories about it.
feel weak like
yeah.
that.
Or write an entire anthology about it.
Or maybe we'll just throw together 13 stories about all different kinds of grief. That's an idea. Okay. So those are all amazing points. I love this conversation for us. Okay. So then I think another piece that I want to talk about, especially because it ties in really well with our specific version of this, is why do we usually only allow people to grieve certain kinds of things? I mean, pretty much now we've only been talking about death because it's the most obvious thing, right? But there's so many kinds of grief, and we often don't recognize it for other people very well. Can anyone want to talk about that?
I was just thinking about this actually while you guys were talking about how different types of grief are changing in terms of social acceptability. And particularly one that springs to mind is miscarriage. Now, you know, I think 10 years ago, the very different landscape. People were not able to talk about it anywhere near as public, and still so much work that needs to be done on this. But that is an example of a form of grief that it wasn't societally acceptable even very recently to talk about. And so I think that that's a restriction that's changing. That's something that, you know, stories can do. They can help bring these issues to light, help get them normalized so people are able to grieve publicly about these issues.
That's a really good point about something that has shifted and is shifting. As you say, lots of work to be done there still. And what about the other even less obvious? Like, I mean, because I think miscarriage, while it has been taboo to discuss it, I think people at least have always appreciated that it's something that people would be upset about. But there are other things that people just are mystified by. Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's really what you just said. I think death is so obvious. It's the one thing that we're like, well, that's okay. We can allow that because we're so supremely uncomfortable with the idea of grieving ourselves. So how can we allow other people, like, we can't even process it ourselves because of our society. Like, so to see other people, we don't know how to deal with other people like ourselves, let alone other people. And so if you move beyond death, which is like the one, like, oh, well, I guess someone close to you died, that's okay. You know, to other sorts of things like Grieving, the one that comes to my mind is loss of a life you dreamed about, which I think is one that a lot of people can relate to, because things just didn't go the way they thought things were going to go in their lives. And that could be for all sorts of reasons, big and small, though that's of course relative. But not being where you thought you would be, being stuck, not having the options you thought you would have, or just a loss of a dream that you always had and now is impossible to you. That's grief. And yet that people don't, well, that's fine. Just get over it. Life happens, and yet it impacts us, and we're not allowed to grieve it. Therefore, we don't want other people to grieve it. So, yeah.
Yeah. Or I think it's interesting to look at the opposite example in societies that maybe we can generally agree idolize romantic love. A very allowed form of grief is heartbreak. And it shows up so much in fiction and drives so much because this is a place where it's okay, because we say that it, it's not really life threatening, but it's funny how that particular piece is allowed, and other bigger things, like I would say grieving, like the loss of identity,
career,
or
friendship. Just, when you lose a friend, like even if you've just not even lost a friend, but fallen out of touch and you haven't kept up with somebody for years and years, there's a grief there that you've lost that friendship. But we don't talk about that. It's more, well, they ebb and flow, friendships ebb and flow, but that, your friends are very important to you, but we're not allowed to talk about that in the same way we talk about romantic relationships that break up, or marriages, or
totally.
Similarly with experience. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine.
I was just going to say, similarly with trauma and experiencing trauma, and you grieve the person you might have been before experiencing trauma, and how it's changed you, experiencing, like, if you develop a disability, grieving and this goes back to what you're saying, Carol, the life that you might have had, or the life that you could have had, or even, there's just so much that our lives encompass in terms of experiences that involve loss of some sort. And we really don't engage with it because we've got to be strong, or we've got to move on. Or we have this, for a lot of people living in crisis, you don't have the privilege to take the time to grieve.
Right.
You don't have
to take the emotional space to grieve, because there's so much crisis in your life. Clayton, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to kind of add to what Levi and Angela had mentioned. The loss of long-term relationships, whether it's intimate or otherwise. We don't really, as a society, we don't really deal with those. And it might be acceptable in fiction and literature, but on a day-to-day basis, a lot of times what you'll hear is, oh, well, he wasn't the one, or you know what, they're not worth your time, move on.
Right.
I
remember
you just burn through it and then be done with it. And that's odd to me.
I was almost arrested in Nebraska, which is where I spent my college years, because I had not even broken up with the person I was in love with. They had just left for a period of months, and I was like, couldn't cry at home, so I was wandering the streets and crying, and the police were like, what's wrong? Something must be, like, are you the thief that we've been looking for, because you're crying, so you're socially deviant. It was a very I just want to grieve over here. I got no place to go, so I'm on the streets.
Wow.
Strange. But
and that goes back to what we mentioned earlier with, like, the stigma we place on allowing men to grieve and to cry, both in fiction and reality.
A man crying in public must be a serious threat to our society, or something.
Or is he deranged?
Mentally ill.
Like, I'm sorry, sir, did you not realize you're not in your home, or your shower, which is the only place that you're
so
allowed
you're being
to cry?
neither tough nor
cry
stoic?
or swear.
Hey, I cry everywhere.
Did you not get the memo on masculinity?
Yeah. Sorry, sir, you're doing this wrong. You are manning incorrectly. We are going to have to take you in.
This got dark.
Oh dear.
All right. Okay. I feel like I want to just part of me just wants to let this conversation go for the next 30 minutes, and that's fine. But I also feel like we could continue with our intended panel topics. So let's shift our angle just slightly to talk about grief in SFF specifically. First of all, let's start on like a little bit of a more positive note. Does anyone know some good examples of grief in SFF? Like, can you think of a book character or whatever where it's really actually given some room to breathe on the page in a way that is healthy or seems healthy?
I really like Senlin Ascends for that. And then the follow-ups. I think Josiah gives Senlin an incredible room to feel really profound emotions through the arc of that novel. And it's done in such a where it's both allowing Senlin to experience emotion, but it's also a commentary on how we generally don't allow men to experience those things. And I think he did it brilliantly.
Nice. That's awesome. Can anyone else have other examples? I've got one, but I can hold it. Okay, I'm going to say mine. No, go ahead. All right, sorry.
I was going to suggest A Monster Calls. And I know there's a movie, which I have not watched, but the book itself is literally just this raw expression of grief. It wrecked me when I read it. And it is, it's about a young boy whose mother is dying of cancer. And it is brilliantly done. And it's amazing when you read these books because, even if your grief is very different in where it comes from, I found that reading characters who are dealing with grief is very cathartic for me, regardless of where it comes from, because I'm crying with them, but for different reasons, right? So yeah, I highly recommend that one. What was yours, Virginia?
Sorry.
We need to be able to hug her somehow.
Can I just say that our silence on this in general is telling that like we're not all throwing out tons of examples.
Yeah, it's hard to think of some. Yeah.
I'll throw out one from our own. She's not here today, but ML Wong has The Sword of Kaigan, who also has a story in our anthology, which I've read. And I have to say that was probably one of the most in-depth, just soul-wrenching treatments of grief. And I sobbed through probably 2/3 of that book, but it was also very cathartic. And I've never rarely come across something like that before in science fiction and fantasy. So I thought of the example before I realized actually the story. But,
totally. So,
yeah.
ML Wong's story is excellent, and I similarly cried through a huge portion of it. And I'm crying now, which I'm not embarrassed by, but I can't really talk through. So, okay. The example I had was A Tale of Stars and Shadow by Lisa Cassidy. It's a 4-book series, and the main character, like, it opens up with the main character dealing with the loss of their best friend, and it's a continual theme throughout, and it deals with both grieving and also not grieving. Like that the character is a warrior type, and she's very much, I'm stronger than this. I've already spent too much time feeling this way, and then she just feels broken because she can't get over it, and then
get over it.
All those pieces, and then finally actually like allowing herself to grieve properly and recognize that there is no properly, there is no time limit, that there is, and then embrace that feeling, embrace that it's something that's going to continue, and then build relationships in other ways, and it's really well done. I feel like it deals with so many aspects of grief, and healing. And then that's, I think, one of the beautiful things too, is that while parts of it are very sad, but it's also a very hopeful story. And it was really cool to see super badass warrior character go through that particular arc. Especially, I read it like in about, I think, December of 2020. So when it was very poignant for 6 months after. Yeah. So That was a good example. Okay. I told you I was going to cry in this panel. I'm starting early.
I was going to say that I feel like one of the, I like that you said that Lisa doesn't give like a time limit and her character doesn't feel a time limit, because I feel like one of the ways that we can do a disservice to the human experience of grief in writing fiction is that we like want to wrap up a character arc in the scope of a story or even a novel. And it's like, no, we can write a series in which that grief may transform, but it doesn't go away. And it isn't like we're healed and magically we're better. It's gonna stick with you. You know, it's like my wife is a midwife, so excuse me for a left field reference. Every time you carry a child, when it separates from the placenta, there is a scar there. And you're going to carry those whether they're visible or not, and your relationship will transform. But I don't like the concept of like healed and done and on.
No, that was actually something that came up, but we just had the mental health in SFF panel, and that was a point that really got hit on, that the 3-act structure, or the need to finish a book, that's part of the problem, that we are rushing over the healing process and we are not being realistic at all in our representation there. And I don't know what this means for the future of books, but I'm quite excited to see what as more authors are becoming aware of this, what kind of stories we're going to evolve into writing.
Yeah. I see it a lot in the indie space where we're just kind of rejecting the assumption that the 3-act structure is the only way to tell a character arc. And it's just like, no, we're gonna let them feel it, and we're gonna feel it with them, and it's not gonna be easy. And they're going to come out of it the other side different, but not the same.
Better.
Not yet. It's there is no better. There's just change.
Different, yeah. You know, it's interesting. I have a novel in which an animal companion dies, and I have gotten so many people who have reached out to me because of the way my character grieves that death, you know, and just saying that how it resonated with them. And it's so telling to me how much we need these stories, because you don't usually reach out to people, you know, about, you know, that heartbreak story, right? Because there's so many out there, right? You know, there's so many of the end of the romantic, you know, you don't feel, unless it's like exactly your experience, like you're not going to reach out. And it's so telling to me how much we need these stories of grief. When you know, I'm little me is getting messages from people who you know, they needed that story, you know. So let's keep writing.
Well, I think you know, we have a couple more questions that we're supposed to go through first, but that does like send us nicely into the Alchemy of Sorrow itself. And so I think I'm just going to roll with it, and we'll come back to our other questions later. Because I think that's an excellent point, Intisar. Like, we do need these stories. I think culturally we need them. And to the point where there's a real audience want for them, which I think was illustrated really well by how successful our Kickstarter was.
Yeah, the utter outpouring of support was a very clear message that people are hungry for something that will give them space to grieve with the story.
Yeah. So I'm going to explain a little bit for the audience about the Kickstarter itself and the anthology. So the anthology started because I wrote a story grieving my mom not long after she died. Damn it, come on, I need to keep talking. I don't mind crying, but I want to be able to still use my voice. It was about a month afterwards that I wrote the story. And I sent it to my editor mainly just to be like, hey, is this anything like, you know, I know it's like, I wrote this very personally just to process things, but is this something that I should consider publishing? Because, you know, I'm never all that sure right after I've written something, especially short stories. And my editor wrote back like, well, I bawled the whole time I was reading it. So and by the end, like, I thought she was like, you know, I'm biased a bit because my editor is also my sister-in-law, so she was also very affected by my mother's death. she's like, but I think it's a story that people should read. And so then a while later, I approached Sarah Chorn, because in the back of my head, my first thought was like, oh, well, I'll submit it to things. But in the back of my head, I was like, I don't know, maybe we need something, maybe something special needs to be done with this. When I eventually approached Sarah Chorn to say, hey, would you be interested in editing a group of stories around this theme, around the theme of grief? And at the time I just said grief and healing. And she was instantly in, like, yes, that is a thing I want to see in the world. And so of course I will edit it. And that was telling too, right? Like just how quickly, we hadn't even talked about who would be in it or anything. I was just like, I wrote this story. Do you think an anthology is a good idea? And instantly she was in. And then we invited the people you see before you and some others. And thus the anthology was born. And as I approached everyone, I got, I was sort of like, this might be weird, but we're thinking of doing an SFF anthology focused on grief and healing. And everybody that you see in front of you was like, yes.
Yeah.
I am in. I have a story for that. That sounds good. And I don't know how many of them were actually already written besides mine. Like, I think a lot of y'all wrote your stories specifically for the anthology. Mine, of course, was written before, but and then we just gained momentum and enthusiasm, et cetera. And at one point we were like, okay, well, to pay everybody properly, let's run a Kickstarter. And then, we launched our Kickstarter thinking, okay, I think with, we've got enough of us and there are enough of us that have big audiences. We'll fund. I'm pretty sure we'll fund.
Yeah.
And 27 hours later, we had 100% funded. And by the end of the whole thing, we'd raised, we did almost 400%. I think we were like 393%.
95, I think.
Something, yeah, of our original goal. And the entire Kickstarter was just like outpouring of support after outpouring of support. So many of our backers saying beautiful things about their own experiences and why this was something that mattered to them. And then we created a backer Discord for our backers so that they could have a chance to interact and that we could interact with them. And the number of grief, like we made a channel for grieving so that people could jump in there specifically with their stories, and that people who didn't have the energy to recognize anyone else's grief at that point could avoid them if they needed to. And that just filled up with these beautiful moments and beautiful interactions, and the whole thing has just been, it's been wonderful. And now I have more best friends, and I'm just like, y'all are so, like, I feel like we've all grown so close, and it's been such a moving experience, and the whole thing has just been,
it really makes our title true, where we all came together to express our individuality and our grief. And through alchemy of storytelling, now we are creating joy and togetherness and community. And so thank you very much, Virginia, for being audacious enough to suggest something like that.
Yes.
Being not sensible enough to be in charge of it.
Someone had to take the bullet, Virginia.
Yeah.
I am that person.
We're with you in your grief.
But it has been so beautiful, and I've loved every minute of chatting with y'all and crying over y'all's stories. And like, I still haven't caught up with them all because I have to do them in small doses, because I do just sob and I'm a wreck for like a day after reading each of them. They're so beautiful, and it means so much to me to have this group and to be doing this thing. And so I do want to move into talking about, just to make sure that we have time, because we've only got 16 minutes left officially, and I will go a little bit over, but it's talking about each of everyone's stories. So one of my favorite things about this anthology, and it wasn't planned this way, we just said, here's the theme, it's grief and healing. And we eventually changed it to grief and hope, which is, I think, actually really important, because we didn't want to imply that grief actually heals completely, like that you ever get to a point where like, oh, that's not a thing anymore. That in all of our experiences, for the most part, it's something that you just carry with you, and it changes, and you learn to live with it in different ways, but it's not something that ever goes away, and we don't expect that. And so hope was something that we wanted to focus on more, because even with grief carrying with you forever, there is hope, and we wanted to find that and highlight that. So it became the anthology of grief and hope. And so I would like to hear from every one of you about the type of grief and the type of hope offered by your story. Because what I love is that we've got so many different shades. They're not all about death. They're about very different kinds of loss. And I would love to hear from each person. And since I'm terrible at alphabetical order, we're just going to go around my screen order. So we're going to start with Krystle. I'll just call people's names, but Krystle, you go first.
So I guess what I learned is that when I bring emotion to a story, I don't necessarily know I'm feeling it until after I've written it, and then I'm a mess. So that's what happened with my story, where I was writing about Ishmael having a delay on his grief and thinking that he was through it, and then being triggered almost a year later. And it was very personal because I also lost somebody right before 2020, and I thought I had dealt with it because we survived, and then we all got together to have the internment, and I realized that I hadn't dealt with it. But writing about that from his point of view in a fantasy setting, let it be. It let it happen so that I could deal with it in my real life. And so it wasn't planned that way. I really like him as a character, and he's very vibrant, and he feels emotions even bigger than I do. So I knew if I was going to write a story about emotions, he was going to be the guy to trust. Speaking of making strong male characters cry. And it gave me somewhere to put that. And it gave me the chance to look at it and make eye contact with it and know that it was there, and know that in reaching out to the community, as he does, I was going to be okay. And so, thank you.
Yeah. We are so glad to have you with us, Krystle, and that story is a beautiful one. And thank you for talking about it. So we'll keep going. Levi, you're next on my screen. So
okay. So I had this story written a while before the anthology, actually, because I had a dear friend who was part of my social circle for a long time, who committed suicide, and after a long struggle with Crohn's disease, and I did not know that I was writing about that at the time. I just knew that I had a character who had lost the ability to hope. Her hope had been crushed too many times. And she ended up interacting with a character who has lost his desire to live. And there is an alchemy that happens between them. And I think a lot of that is my grief about not being there more for Sarah, because we drifted apart for different reasons. But so the alchemy is there in the fiction, and it's a processing for me and a processing for my characters too. And so hopefully it is helpful for other people too. So that's where mine's at.
Thank you, Levi. On my screen, next up is Clayton.
Yeah, I had written the story a while ago as well, and it was about, I had lost my grandfather a few years prior.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
Summer Souls is really beautiful, Clayton.
Gorgeous.
And it if you don't mind me speaking, yeah. Paul, you have a chance. It seems to deal with that theme of being able to hang on even after they're gone. And I was honored that you brought it to me so early in the process.
Yeah. I wanted to talk about suppressed grief.
Mm. It's an important one.
And how it hurts us. And then the catharsis that comes afterwards when we're willing to let it go.
Yeah. All right. And we'll take that for now and move on, and we'll come back. Okay, I'm actually going to drop down to Quinn on my screen, and then I'll just keep calling out names.
Okay. My story, it was, I think, one of those situations where I didn't realize what I was writing about until I was writing it. And so very clearly then, when I was nearly finished with it, there was an experience when my second daughter was born. When she was 3 weeks old, she got sick. She got really sick. She had spinal meningitis, and she started having seizures. And we didn't know what was going on. She suddenly woke up with this horrible fever. Her soft spot was all swollen on her head. And so we're thinking, we call the doctor, oh, give her some Tylenol, see how it's going. And so we give her the Tylenol. I can get through this. Okay. We give her the Tylenol, call back. She's not getting better. She wakes up from a nap and she starts seizing, like her whole right side just starts jerking. And so call the doctor again, and she says, get her to the hospital now. So we take her in, and she's having seizures, and then she's passing out of sleep, and then she's having a seizure, and then she's passing out of sleep. And we get her there, and she's so tiny that they try and put an oxygen mask on her, and it's too big, and it like completely covers her face. They have to push us out of the room. We can't be in there with her because there's so many people in there. I don't know if it was a priest, reverend, whoever comes over, I guess sees how serious the situation is and is like, do you need to speak to anyone? Do you feel that you need to talk? And I swear I thought I was going to bitch slap this person so fast. I can't think about this. I can't do this. And I realized in the story that I wrote, it was about this mother and her daughter is sick and she doesn't know what to do. And so she goes and she's going to bargain. And I realized when I thought back to when my daughter was sick, what I would have given up to just snap my fingers and make her well, and not have to endure the weeks that she was in the hospital and the fear, when they came to me afterwards, when everything was fine, and they were like, if you hadn't gotten her here by morning, she probably would have died. And I think about that, what bargain I would have made. I would have given up anything to make sure she was okay. And so then when I was writing the story, I realized that's what I was writing. What would I give up? I would have given up anything. I would have given her away if it meant that if she was with someone else, she would have been fine. I would have done anything to know that she would thrive and that I would have that hope that she would continue on with her life. And that's basically what came out in mine.
I'm so impressed that you managed to successfully tell that story. I can get through that story.
So the happy ending though is that as we've all been talking, she walked through here to get a change back out and asked for screen time. Perfectly healthy 11-year-old now,
Yay.
So.
But I think we're all just like living through that moment with you. Oh gosh. Next on my screen is Angela.
Oh wow, you I need a moment.
Follow up.
Try just Quenby's story. I actually feel a little bit weird because I made a conscious decision when I was writing my story to write about a grief that was not about death.
Yeah.
And I thought, so I have to explain a little bit before this. I'm the mother of a disabled child. My youngest daughter has Down syndrome, and also she's just recently been diagnosed with autism. And Quenby's story hit hard because when she was a little bit less than 6 months old, she had to have open heart surgery to repair her heart. And the surgeon said it was garden variety heart surgery.
Wow.
We're going to stop her heart. Her heart will be completely stopped for 30 minutes.
What?
And it was, on the heart lung machine. This whole surgery took 3 hours. And then to go in and see her afterwards with all the wires and tubes was hard. And the fact is that she has disabilities that we don't understand and that we can't change, probably. They're just always going to be there. And she's a wonderful little girl. And, we're so happy to have her in our lives. And we were totally taken by surprise when she was born, because we, in the ultrasounds that they did before, everybody thought that she was gonna, she was fine, she was normal, and then she wasn't. But anyway, but when I write, it takes me a long time, I think, to process those kinds of things. So if I'm currently going through something, even if it's been years, it'll pop up in little ways through my story, but it's really hard to deal with some of that. So I thought about writing a story, and then I thought, no, that's too close. I'm going to write, but it ended up being in a different way, because what I ended up doing was writing about a man who has made a really supremely bad decision and wrecked his marriage and lost his child and his wife. So his child is still alive, but he's totally estranged. He can't see his child. And he only realized how important this was, his relation, his fatherhood, and his marriage, and his love for his wife and his child were after he had no possibility of ever repairing it. So it is lost to him forever. And it is one of those stories where that is never going to be fixed, but he can move on and have some hope for the future. He's always going to have that pain there. He's always going to have to deal with that. But hopefully he can redeem himself in some way and go on with things, that there's going to be happiness in the future, and it's not going to take away from the pain that still exists in his past. But
yeah. But there's a nice hopeful twist to that, so that's good. I'm just gonna, because I'm sure this looks arbitrary to everyone else, I am following the pattern on my Zoom screen, which is actually different from the YouTube broadcast. And Kerstin, I'm doing you last on purpose because I am asking you a slightly different question, so just so you are aware. Intisar, could you go next, please?
Sure. So my story is Twice Domesticated Dragons, and I wrote it before you reached out to me, but I had it in my back pocket because I never found a place for it. Which is telling. And it started out when one of my newsletter subscribers wrote to me and was just like, I don't really care about mythological creatures, but man, I hate garden gnomes. And I was like, what? Okay. And
it was a lot of fun to draw.
Yeah. So I was like, what if garden gnomes were evil? Right?
They are, obviously.
And fertile.
And said I needed a natural predator for garden gnomes, and there isn't one. So humanity created these twice domesticated dragons in a failed breeding program, and then dragons escaped instead of being exterminated. And so there's this wild population of dragons that likes to eat garden gnomes.
As you do.
As you know, this is what happens, right? But as I was thinking of this, I didn't know who my point of view character was. I didn't know what it was actually about, because usually for me, like, the surface story is not what the actual story is about. I sat down to write it, and it turned into a completely different story about a little girl who is a refugee and is just trying to hold herself and her family together. And it was definitely influenced by, at that point, it was the Syrian refugee crisis that was on all of our screens. And just thinking about how hard it is to lose your home, to lose everything you are familiar with, to be trying to have to grow up so much faster, And for my character, there's also, she has physical scars from what she's been through. She has mental and emotional scars. And it's really a cathartic story about dealing with your pain, and also coming together both with new people that you might meet, and with family that may have felt like they were failing you before. So obviously it hit really hard, even though I thought I was writing about garden gnomes.
It is both like one of the silliest and most like hard-hitting stories in the anthology. I don't know how you did that.
So yeah, and I was so glad when Virginia, you reached out to me, because I was like, I do have a story and it needs a home, and I'm so grateful to be able to share it.
We're so happy to have it, and you. Okay, in my list next is Rachel, and we're definitely going over time. We already have. Don't worry about it. Keep going.
Sorry. So this is, I mean, I didn't have a story when I was reached out about this, and so for anyone who's read any of my other stuff, I mainly write to get through what I've been going through in life, and my first 3 books, if you read them, you can tell I was not in a happy place when I wrote them. And I think that's why I got asked to join the anthology. I think people read it and went, oh, this person might work here. But I'd managed to work through a lot of issues. And I was like, I'm going to focus on the healing side of this anthology. It's like, I want this. I feel like I'm in a better place now. I feel like I can actually write a potentially happy story here. So I tried. This was the closest I've ever got, guys. I really was.
It's beautiful.
I think it's beautifully hopeful. Yeah. Keep going.
So it's all about the aspect of, how the scars, what Levi talked on earlier about when you miscarriage or you have a child, you still have the placental scar, and it's the same. I know so many people who have physical scars, but we all go through everything here, but there's never any evidence that people can see that they can actually hold on to. And I was casting around for ideas, and this idea came to me because a friend of mine that was going through, she had so much that she was going through that was invisible, and it was her battling, and she was this campaigner about this. She wanted everyone to know that just because you can't see invisible disabilities or invisible struggles like mental health and grief, it doesn't mean that they're not there, and we need to all have that compassion for each other. So I made a world where grief it leaves a scar on you that people can see, and then I just wanted people to be able to accept that other people were going through this. And I won't go into more details about what happened then, because I don't think I can. This has been really emotional, but I just wanted to say thank you to this anthology. I lost my friend. She hasn't been able to continue her campaigning, and I was so angry at this situation, but I've had been able to channel that grief in this anthology, and I get to try and keep her living on through what she wanted to live on and help other people. So I'm clearly still in the very angry stage of all of this. But yeah, that's why I'm so grateful for this anthology. I'm so grateful to Virginia for making it happen.
Oh, you were invited for a reason, and we're delighted to have you, and I am sad but also glad that the timing worked out the way it did. Carol.
Oh yeah. I've been so engrossed in listening to everyone. When I initially was approached about this, I thought it's a story that takes place within a world I've already created, because so many of the characters have experienced loss in their lives, and so it was an easy reach in that way. And this is one of those situations where I think when I started writing the story, this happens to me a lot, actually. I did not realize that it was actually touching on things within my own life. That happens to me as I write. I think, oh, this is a fun story. And then, oh, that came from somewhere. And so it's really about a teenage boy who, through no fault of his own, loses really everything. But the hardest hitting thing is the loss of his identity and his community. So who he thought he was, where he thought he belonged. And I didn't think I was going to cry. Oh my gosh. Okay. And
join the club.
And which is something I have experienced. And the betrayal of people who you thought were part of that community. And that's something that he experiences and finds himself utterly alone. And so I actually got stuck at a certain point in writing it because I think I didn't realize where it was coming from. And I pulled up an old song, because sometimes music is something that connects me to emotion, from a time in my life when I was going through something, and listened to it, and it just hit me. And I was like, oh, this is where this is going. This is why I'm here. And this is why I'm stuck. Because I needed to process too. So that's when I got unstuck and managed to finally finish editing and getting through it. And in the end, it's about, you may lose who you thought you were and where you thought you belonged, but the hope is there's another place. You change, you grow, and you find a new community. I mean, that's the hope, that there are people with whom you can connect. They're out there. So that's what my story is about and kind of where it came from.
Thank you, Carol. Okay, so we are already over time, but that's okay. But I'm going to try to have us not go too much past. Well, we're going to, like, the 45-minute mark is going to be the end. But so we got a couple more minutes. I really thank you all so much for talking about that, and especially because obviously we all brought ourselves to tears talking about these things. You can tell that all these stories mean a lot to each of us and to each other. Like I cried, I think, with almost everybody because we're going through. There's so much going on here. We have Kerstin Espinosa with us, and if y'all are wondering why we haven't asked Kerstin about her story yet, it's because she didn't have a story in the anthology. Because unfortunately, I hadn't met Kerstin yet when I grabbed everybody for this. But we brought Kerstin in for a very special thing, which is one of the very first goals of our Kickstarter, stretch goals. Initial goals. It was part of the initial goal, right? Was to have Kerstin illustrate all of our stories. We wanted to have, because the cover deals with the entirety of the anthology. We wanted individual artwork for each story, and we knew that was going to be expensive. But actually, Kerstin very generously gave us, I think, one heck of a deal on the amount of work that she put into every illustration. So that's part of why the Kickstarter happened at all. And we knew that Kerstin was the perfect person for the job. And I think it's been really emotional for all of us, I think, to see our stories illustrated that way. The last question for Kerstin, and then we'll see if there's time for anything else after that. But Kerstin, how did you approach illustrating so many different types of grief, and then what were some of the challenges and benefits to illustrating such different stories, because they are?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to have to share a bit of my experience with the anthology so you can all really appreciate how much you devastated me in this whole process. I do want to say, like, first of all, like, it's been an absolute pleasure, right? Of course, like, you know this, I always talk about it, that I'm very honored to be part of this anthology.
We're honored to have you.
But we have a before and after, Kerstin. before the project, back when Krystle had just DM'd me out of nowhere, I was super young and naive. I am now old and downtrodden. Like this project was pitched to me, right? And I thought, okay, cool. It's an anthology on grief, obviously very, very heavy emotions, very heavy subject matter, but I'll only I would only be drawing other authors' interpretations of grief, right? Like, everyone else has done the hard work. You all wrote the stories, you all wrote the characters. This was my naive phase. You all developed the world building, and I am but a simple visual translator, so to speak. And I was so wrong. Like, just even drawing the first illustration was Intisar's, and I was like, all right, a dragon and a garden gnome. How emotional can it be? But no, like, it was pretty emotional, which I feel ridiculous when I talk about it with other people, because it's like, oh, what was the drawing about? It's like, oh, it's an evil garden gnome, and I'm just like in tears. And they're just like, Kerstin has lost it. Like, she's just lost it. Like, she should stop drawing right now. Like, it's not doing her any good. So, like, I heavily underestimated the emotional impact it would have. Like, I mean, I'm laughing about it now because I cried it all out before. Like like I legit thought it wouldn't be as intense because they weren't, so to speak, my stories, right? They're your stories. But what happened was, like, I was working with each author. Quenby, I'm still in the middle of yours, but aside from that, I think I've finished everyone's illustrations here. And what happened was, I was working with each of you, but I was sort of interpreting each author's interpretation of grief. So it was not possible at all to avoid emotional accountability, like I thought back then, but like that the authors and I were sort of sharing it in a way. So to answer your question, that makes it like my answer the same for the challenges and the benefits. Like in a way, like grief is such a huge topic with so many causes and manifestations. Like I remember 2 drawings having a similar subject matter, just a full-blown like a portrait, right? Like Madeline's story with her main character Solana wearing that file around her neck, and Krystle's story with Ishmael. And if you think about it, if you've seen those 2 drawings, they are super different from each other. And they, while the subject matter was similar, or like just the portrait, the subject itself was not like the manifestations of grief. So that was really awesome to work with such different facets and really like devastating, you guys. But I mean, I am proud to say, I think like I'm gonna pretend Krystle's not laughing at me, but with me.
With you, I promise it's with you.
No, it's okay. Krystle already knows how much Ishmael kind of devastated me. But just like what I am proud of, like in everyone's stories, insofar as I can say that I'm proud of everyone here for writing these stories. And what I'm really proud of is how differently they turned out in style. I feel like when I think about like the drawing of the garden gnomes, geez, can't believe I was so wrecked about this. And they're so different from like Carl's story, like the illustration I did for Carl's story, just the feel of it, the symbols, the style is so different. And then I compare it to, for example, Rachel's story, which is also super different because it's a bit more technical, scientific, and then swerves into nightmarish with Virginia's story, and then like swerves into, it goes in all sorts of directions. And I want to say thank you for this humbling and very heavy learning experience. Like I don't know. Like I said, I can sort of talk about it now, but I cried it out beforehand, so we're good.
It has truly been an honor to have you working on all of our stories and to see those visual representations of our work. And it's just I'm so excited to share those illustrations with everybody in the book. It's going to be so amazing. It adds so much depth, I think, to every one of our stories, and I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Oh, of course.
Sorry.
And also
Sorry.
Krystle, you look so guilty.
She made me do it. What am I? I'm the what's the
instigator?
I'm the executor. Yeah. Virginia's the mob boss and I'm the enforcer.
Were you a simple minion and all that?
Simple minion. All right, so we've reached, we're almost 15 minutes past, which is as far as I want to take us in terms of the next panel now starts in only 15 minutes. And we just want to make sure that everything runs on time from this. Obviously, we did not get to talk about all the things we had planned, but I really love what we did talk about. And thank you all so much for everything that you said and for sharing those bits of your soul and your grief with us. I will say that one of the questions was about making more men cry in fiction. We didn't get to that, but instead we demonstrated 2 men who are awesome, fabulous.
We're really proud of you guys.
of men crying on camera. So take that with you and please internalize it. These are strong, wonderful men, and they absolutely cried on camera because that's okay. And thank you all. And these are also strong, wonderful women who also cried on camera because that's okay. That part. But I feel like we have this weird division where we get a pass, but guys don't, and that's just dumb. Everyone of all genders should be able to cry about things that are sad. Please take that and run with it in everything. And we're now out of time, but thank you so much to all of you wonderful panelists. This was amazing. I love you all. I'm sorry. I'm just going to say it. It's true. And you're all my friends, and I'm sorry you're stuck with me forever now. And
Yes, Virginia.
You're our everything.
And everyone else, audience members, thank you so much for showing up. Audience members, I see that there was a ton of commentary going on in the chat. There may have been questions. As you can tell, we had absolutely no time to get to them, and I apologize for that. But we've already gone way over, so we'll have to, try to answer them in comments or something later. I have a small being attached to me. But thank you everyone for coming. The next panel is on in 15 minutes. It's a reading with Annabelle Campbell, and it starts at 4 p.m. Central. If you want to know local time, please check out our website, which displays in your local time. Also, don't forget to check the book sale and all the other things. Enjoy the rest of the QuaranCon weekend. And if this was sad, we're not actually even sorry about it.
Not sorry.
That is okay. All right. Everyone wave and smile. I'm hitting the end screen button.
So nice to be with y'all.
All right. We are ended.